I'm Scott Allen Miller, and this is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. You've been living in Nicaragua for a few hours now. You're a new expat. You've just arrived, and you probably want to buy a car. Is that a good idea? What should you be thinking about? Why is it that you want a car in your first few hours? I'm not sure, but we're going to talk about it right after the bump. I happen to have this conversation today, but I have these quite often. It is a very common thing, especially for North Americans, when moving to a new country, Nicaragua in this example, we're going to talk about, to want to have a car. Now, this makes sense because when we're coming from places like the US or Canada, where one, lots of open space, you got to have a car. And two, it is part of the culture. We have cars. You just assume everyone has a car. To move to a new city without a car, you'd immediately be like, you got to deal with this right away. You can't go more than a couple days without having a car. So there's a very logical reason why many of us react that one of our very, very, very first actions we need to do as we get off the plane is to get a car. Some people are worried about getting a car before they're worried about getting a working phone number and internet, which doesn't make sense. But it's a really dramatic thing that we have this feeling we must need a car. Of course we need a car, right? And Nicaragua is not a heavily dense population, right? So it seems to mirror the United States in that you need to be able to drive places, but it's not the US, and a lot of factors change. When you're arriving in any new country, you really need to evaluate things. I've lived in 8 different countries, and I've visited many more. Now, when you're a tourist, you often want a car because you're actively touring, right? That's where the word comes from. So when you're doing that, the desire for a car is generally much higher than if you actually lived there. Having lived in 8 different countries, in all those places, only once did I ever rent a car the entire time I was there. When I lived in Spain, I lived on top of a mountain, and we didn't bother renting a car for about half of the time that we lived there. And then some of it we got a lease and had a car. And it was nice, but we didn't need it all the time, and we rarely drove it. It sat idle much of the time. When we lived in Italy, we did not have a car. When we lived in Greece, we did not have a car. We would rent one from time to time, but we didn't keep a car all the time. When we lived in Ukraine, never had a car, never drove once. When I lived in Romania, we did. This one, we had a car the entire time from the moment we touched down until we left, and we lived in a tiny village in the middle of absolutely nowhere with nothing around. You absolutely did have to have a car. So it goes both ways. When we lived in Panama, I only had a car for a couple days, just a quick rental. When living in Nicaragua, the first time, same thing, just a few days of cars. When we moved to Nicaragua permanently, this last time, we went about a year with no car. And then our company ended up with a car after some time. But we never got one personally until just recently, after nearly 5 years. So my own example is that you don't need cars, but I do drive. I'm comfortable driving in all these places. So I'm not someone who's avoiding cars because I don't want to drive or can't drive. That's not a problem. And I have absolutely no issue driving stick. And I drive in Europe, where it is so much crazier than driving here in Latin America. I've never been anywhere in Latin America that came close to what our driving lives were like in Europe. So very comfortable driving here. To me, all Latin American driving that I've done, it's been very casual. It's very relaxing. I don't find it to be stressful at all. So I don't have those reactions to drive me to be like, no, you can't have a car. But from a purely practical standpoint, there's a bunch of things you need to think about when you're coming into a new country and thinking about your transportation. First, when you're newly arrived, buying things like cars are dangerous because you don't know that everything's going to work out. You don't know what all your situation is going to be. So you want to leave as much flexibility as possible. And every day that you stay in country, you're going to be more and more sure of exactly what you want to do. The last thing you want to do is buy a car and immediately then make the decision that you got the wrong car or you're not in the right country and you need to move or whatever. That's really dramatic. Now, that would take a lot to have that happen, but that's something you want to avoid. You don't want to be buying a car and then in 3 years be like, oh, I decided I'm going to move. Now I have this car I want to deal with, right? It's just something you want to be very aware of. So if in your first day, you really have no idea. In your 5th day, you have a better idea. After a month, after 6 months, after a year, it just gets better and better. So you want to give yourself some amount of time. I'm not saying you have to wait years, but definitely a little bit of time for sure. Don't be thinking about vehicles before you arrive. That's for sure. Make sure you get here and evaluate the situation. Now, the first thing is, yeah, are you going to stay and do you want a car? Like that's the big stuff, right? But the second thing is, where are you going to live within the country, right? Some people know right away, some people don't. But often, especially here in Nicaragua, people change over time, right? Your first month or two, you like one thing, but then you get tired of it, you move on to something else. So you may change what you need for a car. A lot of people come in and are like, oh, I just need a little sedan, little Toyota, something cheap. It's not going to break down. Then they realize they're going to be living on a dirt road on the side of a hill. Now they need a 4x4, and then they figure out that they want to have a little business and they need to move a lot of lumber around. Suddenly they need a Hilux, and their needs keep changing, right? You don't want to jump into things because your needs have a very high likelihood of changing over a little bit of time. Now, once you've been here again for a year or two, you probably have a lot of that ironed out. You're not quite as lost as to what your future is going to be like. That cone of uncertainty gets more narrow, so that's important. The third thing is that when you first get here, driving is a lot more hectic. You don't have a lawyer lined up in case something goes wrong. You probably don't speak the language yet in case you have to interact with the police. Not a big deal, but it's something you have to do, right? We have to stop and talk to them on a regular basis. So for those of us who speak Spanish, not a big deal. For those of us who have lawyers, not a big deal. But for those who are, panicking because they feel like it's like an American stop and they only speak English or some other language, and they just, it's panic, right? And you have no one to call, no one to be like, I don't know what to say. Let me get I don't know, right? If you don't have that, you're going to be that much more nervous. Driving is that much more stressful. And how much in that first time you're going to be touring around? Don't use your first days in the country to be wild traveling person. Spend some time settling in, figuring things out, right? Over time, yeah, you'll want to travel more and more. And over time, you'll know what you want to do with a car more and more, and you'll be better equipped for it. Now, importantly, right, there's this feeling that many North Americans have that when we arrive, we can't afford not to have a car. And this is normal, right? If you live in the United States, it would be crazy to imagine a scenario where not having a car was cheaper than having a car. But outside of the United States, that's actually pretty normal. We have great public transportation. We have affordable taxis. Private drivers are not expensive at all. So I'm not saying that those are things you want to do for forever. For many people, you do. Keep in mind that the average Nicaraguan does not own a car. And in fact, the average expat, I don't believe, owns a car. That's a lot of expats do, and a fair number of Nicaraguans do, but it's definitely not the norm or expected in any way whatsoever. Everything in society is designed for you to be able to get there on public transportation, or at very least an inexpensive taxi. So the thought processes, the approach, the culture is all different than you're probably imagining. Of those people who do have vehicles, it's often motorcycles or scooters rather than full-blown cars. So everything's a bit different. You really want to evaluate what your needs are going to be and what makes sense and how much driving you're going to do. Now, it's easy to say, well, okay, but I'm going to have to take taxis, I'm going to have to do all these things. Okay, but learn to break down those numbers. How much is a car going to cost you? And you have to look at the total picture, right? You've got to do the driving. You've got to take care of the maintenance. You have to do the shopping for the car. You have to get the fuel for the car. You have to, all these things, plus you have to pay for the car. Once you start adding up the monthly cost of a car and realize it costs more than you probably think, right? You're like, well, I got to take out a car payment. I'm going to be paying $200, $300 a month to get a car. And then I got to pay for fuel. That's going to be, $30, $60 a month, whatever. Just start working out those numbers and then say, how many places have I gone for that money? And then do the same calculation and look at whether you use public transportation or you use a private driver or whatever, and start figuring out what are you going to pay. And in many cases, having a car will be cheaper, which is why many people end up buying a car. But in those cases, it's pretty rare that it's a lot cheaper. Generally, it's pretty close. But keep in mind, it's a lot more work. Now, if you're retired and you have plenty of free time and you're not worried about going out and interacting with people and doing things, then taking your car for maintenance and going and filling up your gas tank on your own and dealing with any problems should you break down on the side of the road and purchasing a car and all those kinds of things may not be a big deal for you. Maybe you have plenty of free time and no reason not to do it, and you just find it interesting. Then by all means, that's fine. But for most of us, that stuff is stressful, potential problems, and we could be using that time for something we enjoy more. So putting in a whole bunch of effort to break even while having to drive ourselves instead of having someone drive us around doesn't often work out really well. But in many cases, you will actually find that it's much cheaper. If you think about the fact that most of us don't go out driving on a regular basis, then it starts to be, oh yes, when I own a car, I pay for it every day whether I drive or not. But when I don't own a car, I only pay for transportation at the times that I use it. So I live in Leon here, and I may leave the house a few times a week. Let's say I go out 3 times a week. That's almost every other day. Well, if I was to own a car, I'd be paying pretty close to $100 per week for the right to be able to drive around and deal with stuff. But if I was to call a taxi, even though I live outside the city and I have to pay extra for the taxi, I'm generally only paying about $3 to $5 for any given trip. If I lived anywhere closer to the city, it would be much less, right? But if I live out in the country, so let's just say $5 to go in and $5 to come back. I do that 3 times a week. That's $30. I'm only looking at $120 per month for basically all the trips around the city that I would want to do. And if any of my friends are going in or out of the city, there's a lot of times that I can catch a ride. There's a lot of places that I can walk to. And there's a lot of times that I can take the public bus. This is the taxi's the luxury high cost option. I can take a bus all the way to downtown for most of the day, like 18 hours a day for about 20 cents. And it's really convenient and incredibly safe. So that's really nice. And when you start saying, well, you know what, if I could eliminate some of those rides by going in for 20 cents and maybe I go to the grocery store and just take a taxi home, you can do with a tiny bit of effort, you can, in most cases, make things very inexpensive. You start putting these numbers together and it's often, I would say most of the time, especially for new expats who aren't like starting a business where you need to drive for the business, that's a different thing. You will almost certainly find that it's break even or cheaper to not go through all the effort of buying and dealing with a car. Plus, there's less risk, right? If you end up traveling more than you expect, you can go buy a car later. If you end up traveling less than you expect, maybe you do a bunch of trips when you first get here, but over time you do fewer and fewer, then your cost will go down. You're not invested, you're not tied into that car that now you can't get out from under. Remember, selling a car, yes, you can do it, but you're going to take a loss on the value, plus you're going to pay the transfer tax, right? So these things add up. So you don't want to do that casually. Of course, it's okay if you need to, but if you're just thinking of how am I going to save some money, that's not a great way to do it. We get into financially thrashing, which is a dangerous thing that happens to a lot of expats. They start making decisions and switching decisions and buying and selling. I need to make a video just on that. But that is a dangerous thing. We've seen a lot of that. People who jump into decisions and start this thrashing process, and they lose so much money because they haven't settled down, but they keep thinking that they have. This car will play into that and potentially is a big risk. Now, of course, people mention, but it costs so much to go into, say, Managua, and we almost all need to do it from time to time. That's absolutely true. But to give you some real world numbers, living here in Leon, going into Managua for a round trip is only about $80. Right now, that's going to the airport. Maybe you want to go a little bit farther. Let's assume it's $100. Right now, it's not going to be a full day of driving you around the city. That'll be a little bit more. But even if you needed to do that, how often do you need to do that? For most people, if you're planning, you're looking at maybe once a month. Now, let's say it's $150, which is on the expensive side. But if you're putting in a whole day of shopping in Managua, plus you're going all the way there, all the way back, okay, that makes sense. However, for that $150, remember you're getting a couple things. One is the car. You're not paying to own a car or to maintain a car during that time, which clearly is not going to be anywhere near $150, but it may easily be $10 to $20, right? That's a lot of miles to put on the car. You got oil change to think about, the potential for accidents. You have to factor that in, like how many accidents you have per mile. Here, cars get scraped and scratched a lot, which is not a big deal, but you got to do something. Maybe you get something in your tire. These little things add up, right? So you got to figure out the cost of wear and tear on the car, plus the cost of the car itself, excuse me. Then you have to figure, you've got to navigate Managua and all the way there. You got to deal with parking. If you have a driver, a lot of that stuff gets easier. Plus, if you're retired or you have problems carrying things, often having a driver means they're going to help you carry bags and stuff. So if you're doing a bunch of shopping, they may end up being kind of an assistant in many of those cases. They got nothing else to do. And if you have a good rapport, this would be a very normal thing to have happen. So maybe you end up buying them lunch as well, right? So a little bit extra money, of course. But so you've got someone to go park the car, drop you off at the door, make your life a lot easier than if you drove yourself. Maybe go out and start the car and get that air conditioning running before you get into it, right? There's a lot of little conveniences and luxuries that come from having a driver. Plus, they could drop you off and go fuel up and come back to get you. You don't have to necessarily be with them at every moment. I've done a lot of this. I've used drivers so many times going around the country, and you just get used to these things. But even for us going all the way to Matagalpa, which is quite a bit farther than Managua, $90 is what we pay for the whole family to go, right? So quite affordable when you're not doing it every day. Now you have to factor in the fuel. I don't know how much it's going to cost to go all the way to Managua and back, but it's more than $10. It's easily $20 to $30 again, right? It's not a full tank of gas by any stretch, but it's a bit of gas, especially once you're driving around the city for the day. At your $150, that's part of that cost. So at the end of the day, yes, it's definitely going to be more expensive for that one most expensive day to hire a driver. But when you offset it across all the other costs, in many cases, especially if you can work it down to just going about once a month, it's probably going to remain cheaper to take taxis and have private drivers throughout the week and have maybe one trip to Managua scheduled per month to do your big shopping. And for most people, that's going to work out. And again, you can always get a car in the future. There's no need to race to get one now. Whatever it feels like, chances are the more it feels you should get a car, probably the more you should wait, right? Because it's an emotional pressure. There's very rarely, but there are exceptions, right? There's some people who just end up getting a farm in the middle of nowhere. They're on a dirt road. They have to have a big truck and they got to have it on day one. There are some people who do that. I generally recommend against any of those things, right? Start where you can do things more easily, ease your way in. You're just setting yourself up for disaster if you jump into situations where you never have a chance to adapt. But for some people, it's what they want to do. For some people, it works. So we can't say it's wrong, just it's more risky, right? So for those people, yes, there's definitely going to be exceptions where having that car right from the beginning does make sense. But for the average person, if you are retired, if you are coming down with a family, if your family is enormous, that may be a pushing you towards a car. But the bigger the family, the more risk there is with the move, that someone's not going to be able to take the heat, someone's not going to like the culture, someone's not going to like the food, someone's going to have an allergy, you name it. So then you want to be more careful, right? So even in the situations where it seems like, well, obviously I need a vehicle, often you still don't, right? We see time and time again, it is extremely rare, but not impossible, not unheard of, that when we meet people who have moved down and immediately get a car, they almost universally regret it. And people who wait almost universally don't regret not having gotten a car right away. They may want one in the future. Tons of people end up wanting one. But lots of people actually come down. I would say the average person, just barely, comes down, thinks they want a car, because we all think we do, and after some time says, actually, I'm pretty happy not having one. Or I go rent one on the rare occasion that I want to drive, which is fine. And use drivers, use taxis. And over time, most of us find that we travel around quite a bit less. And if you're like me, at first it was I traveled more. Then it was I traveled more and it was by private driver. And now almost all of my far drive is either catching a ride or going with the business, of course, or I take public transportation. In probably 50% or more of my trips to Managua, I take public transportation for just $2 or $3. Now, I'm not doing big shopping trips, but I'm going to see someone, I'm going to do some activity, I'm going to do some quick shopping or whatever. I need to go deal with some office or something. All those things I can do for just a few dollars. And when I'm in Managua, I just need a few dollars to take a taxi somewhere. Last time I went to see Luke there, it was a $2.75 trip to Managua, and then I overpaid a $3 taxi to take me down to where he was at the bar. That's how easy it is, right? I overpaid and the entire trip across the country was less than $6. So when you look at it from that perspective, often it's, okay, this is a very different set of numbers than I'm imagining. And of course, when you're first moving down, you're like, I don't want to use a private driver. That sounds either luxurious or crazy or cumbersome. But it's not. It's very common here. And taking taxis all the time for Americans sounds again, not something you want to do, but here, very common. It's normal life, right? And so really what I'm encouraging you to do is avoid impatience. Take some time to observe and learn how other people are handling it. See how Nicaraguans live, and then make your decisions of if that's something you want to adapt to, if that's something you can adapt to, how much it's going to impact you, and then run real numbers once you know what your actual driving situation is going to be like, and once you know what actual driving scenarios are going to be like, so you know what vehicles make sense for you. Even if you just wait a month or two, it's going to make a big difference. And there's no way that you're going to spend so much money on private drivers during a few months that you'll notice any negative impact. But there's a really good chance that you're going to save yourself a fortune. So it's amazing how much for expats, the big answer is be patient. Don't race into decisions. Certainly don't make decisions before you've moved. Don't decide that you're definitely going to do certain things before you've started acclimating to the culture. You need to step back and give it a little bit of time, and you will find that you get much better results. Once in a while, you would have gotten it right, but on average, like me, you would have said the wrong things from abroad, and once you got here, you'd have been like, oh no, I didn't picture things the way that I should have. And it's not that we had misinformation, it's just that we have a lot of gaps to fill in over time. And a lot of we change once we get somewhere, right? The amount that I want to go out isn't so much a reflection of the world around me as much as it's a reflection of my personal state of what I'm feeling like at the moment, right? Maybe I'm getting older and more tired. Maybe I'm working more hours or whatever, and that's going to change how I do things. Those aren't things I can necessarily predict from abroad. And you need a little bit of time to just learn about yourself in a new place. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to take a moment to sponsor the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. And of course, you can support the channel in other ways, like getting in the comments and saying hello, sending in a video question, all the information you need for anything like that in the show notes. You can watch another video, give us a thumbs up, share on social media, tell a friend about the show. And of course, we have a GoFundMe to support my producer, Marcela, who has stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Get in the show notes. It's like the first thing right there. My coffee and that are the top things. That makes a really big difference. She is a single mother of 2 here in Nicaragua, lives in Leon, but has to do her treatment in Managua, so it's a big process. Her healthcare is taken care of by the government, but all the other things in life for someone with stage 4 cancer are not. And so your contributions and your thoughts and prayers and mental thinking of her and all that really make a huge difference, and she really appreciates it. So thank you to everyone who has been supporting her. The support, now that we have the GoFundMe working, has been pouring in and really, really does make a huge difference. So thank you so much to everyone for that, and I will see all of you tomorrow.